this horrible cycle of the trauma, the tragedy. I mean, you mentioned that the whole nation. I had to send a note to my brother to say, my niece and nephew, who are 9 and 10, don't watch the show today because I don't want them to be traumatized. Yeah. They'll hear about it. And parents are dealing with this all across the country.
We do have breaking news. We are learning about the identity of the individual behind this horror that we saw there in Minneapolis today. Law enforcement has identified the shooter as Robin Westman. This is according to multiple law enforcement officials who have been briefed on the matter.
We are continuing to follow the latest details about this shooter. Apparently, they targeted the Annunciation Catholic Church and school specifically.
So we're still trying to get a better handle on. We're still going through the videos and going through the writings. So just to describe it to folks, they're YouTube videos where there's a number of either journals or they look like journals where there's a number of writings, not all of them in the English language. There's some sort of Eastern European language that's used. Some of it is in English. And this individual is writing about a whole host of things. Won't get into all the particular details. As we stated last hour, we're not here to do the bidding of this individual so that we can basically put out the information they were hoping to gain out of this shooting. We won't get into all the particular details.
So earlier this morning, as I'm sure the nation is now well familiar with, we witnessed a horrific and tragic and vile and disgusting school shooting that took place at a Catholic elementary school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our thoughts and prayers are obviously with the victims and all those who are affected by this horrific and terrible event. Thus far, it's been confirmed that at least 2 people have been killed, 20 have been injured. It's a horrible event to witness. And with that said, I think it ought to be a universal consensus in this country that maybe the thing not to do is immediately rush to politicize it, especially when you don't know the basic facts, right? You can have a political argument once you know what actually happened, but much like you saw in Boulder, Colorado, in Nashville a couple of years ago, immediately, prominent leftists and Democrats, as usual, trying to politicize tragedy in order to campaign for the next election, immediately rush to say what? This is an issue of guns. This is the fault of Republicans. That is, of course, despite the fact that the incident to begin with took place in the state of Minnesota, which is obviously under the control of Tim Walz and a Democrat legislature. But never mind that, any point where we can immediately send out the script, anything bad happens, to blame the GOP, to blame the right-wingers, and to blame the guns, that's exactly what they're going to do, and that's what they have done. Except in the hours since, as we learn more about the incident, it turns out the narrative there might not be as strong or convincing or universal as these people appear to think. Because now that the shooter has been identified and that the details are now coming out, it would appear, by all accounts, that this is a similar repeat to the Nashville shooting a few years ago, which is to say that you have a hatefully motivated left-wing individual who identifies as a transgender, that's just exactly what the details here are, that appears to have committed a hate crime, not just against Christians, but specifically Christian children, the most innocent among us. That ought to be something that you can universally condemn. But of course, it seems like ever since, because of the fact that the shooting does not exactly fit a political narrative, I think very soon here you're already going to see attempts to bury the story first of all. And even more disgustingly, we're witnessing, guys. Now that, we know what the shooter was, the identity of this individual, the folks over at MSNBC are even going so far as to respect the guy's pronouns and, try to do all this woke, apparently defending or making, showing courtesy to the individual who just shot a bunch of children. It's an utterly disgusting scene to witness. So in today's video, I want to kind of run you through the details that we've learned. Again, this is not me trying to even get super duper political about it. This is a mentally ill individual. It is true, by the way, when you want to look at the motives. It wasn't exactly inspired by the far right, let's just say. But the greater picture is what? It's the fact that, again, these people immediately, without knowing anything that happened, rushed to attack us, rushed to try to campaign for an election. And then once the details come out and the narrative doesn't fit, they go so far as to make excuses for the shooter. These people are utterly disgusting. But anyways, we will tell you about it in today's video. So that said, as you can see, immediately after this horrific tragedy, you already saw leftists sending out the script, all virtually saying the same exact thing. Here's one example from Krasenstein. He says that at least 20 people injured and 2 killed in a mass shooting at the Annunciation Catholic Church and its school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Going on here to say that prayers aren't working. We need action. If prayers worked, a house of prayer wouldn't experience this. Of course, seeming to not have any idea of the concept of prayer and how it actually works. But this is already what you see. In response to the fact that Catholics, that Christians, not just them, but children of the faith just got killed or shot at, right? Attacked. The immediate talking point, this is so telling, was not to blame the shooter. It was to blame, first of all, the guns, right? Despite the fact that, again, you don't even know how this person got the gun. We don't even know that yet. Now, it could come out that the gun was acquired legally or whatever. I would point out that in the state of Minnesota, that would actually be a piece of proof of gun control not working, because even in a Democrat state, it turns out, bad guys can still manage to do things, right? This idea that you're going to be able to legislate immorality or human violence or evil from this world is just utterly ridiculous. But on top of that, not only do they immediately rush to call for gun control, not knowing whether or not this shooting, the acquirement of this firearm, has anything to do with gun laws or gun control at all. We still don't know that, right? But on top of that, the script went out to not just do that, but to mock the very Christians who are getting fired at inactively, right? And I want you to remember this. This is not just something from random mainstream Democrat influencers. This is a sentiment even uttered by the Minneapolis mayor, we've talked about here rather recently, Jacob Frey, who in response to, again, Christians being attacked and attempted murder on children, saying here that, quote, "Don't say this is just about thoughts and prayer right now, because these kids were literally praying." And that is true, by the way. The kids were in the pews, they were doing prayer, and the shooter ran in and attacked them. Utterly disgusting thing to say, but take a listen.
Those families are suffering immense pain right now. Think of this as if it were your own. Every one of us needs to be wrapping our arms around these families, giving them every ounce that we can muster. These were Minneapolis families. These were American families. And the amount of pain that they are suffering right now is extraordinary. And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church. These are kids that should be learning with their friends. They should be playing on the playground. They should be able to go to school or church in peace without the fear or risk of violence, and their parents should have the same kind of assurance. These are the sort of basic assurances that every family should have, every step of the day, regardless of where they are in our country.
Yeah, well, this sums it up pretty perfectly, right? Oh, you were murdered by a left-wing trans person? True, by the way. That's indeed a factual statement on what happened here. Let me take a dump on your religious beliefs then. Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. Utterly vile, utterly disgusting, but there you have it. Now, here is the thing, is that it's crazy to the degree this script and the social manipulation in response to this has gone out, because now you don't even just have Democrats doing their usual thing, which is to, yes, politicize tragedy. Even Trey Gowdy over at Fox News is now suggesting gun control after today's tragedy in Minneapolis. I again reiterate to these people, this happened in Minnesota. This is not a red state. We have no idea how this individual acquired the firearm to this point. Could have been legally, but still that would show that gun control actually doesn't work. Or heck, it could have even been illegally, further showing that gun control doesn't work. Again, guys, we have no idea. Yet immediately, people just go out and say, oh, we need legislation. What legislation specifically would have prevented this, guys? Oh, you can't answer that question. because we don't even know the details. So maybe, yes, before you rush to push political agendas about all of this stuff, maybe like know what happened. Maybe even know what political talking point you can come up with. But here you see a utterly just cowardly and easily manipulated and frankly airheaded person on the alleged right wing parroting the same exact idea that Democrats are doing today, which is the problem is not obvious mental illness. It's not even left-wing radicalism or, some other issues, because you can clearly see what it is. The problem, by the way, is not mainstream and rampant hate against Christians, against the very faith that founded Western civilization across the West itself. No. Surely the problem must be guns. Even Fox News is saying that. Take a listen. Utterly disappointing, to say the least.
Our system is reactive. Something bad happens, we react to it. And what people are crying for now is, how can we prevent this? How can we stop it? And the only way to stop it is to identify the shooter ahead of time or keep the weapons out of their hands. And so we're going to have a conversation of freedom versus protecting children. I mean, how many school shootings does it take before we're going to have a conversation about keeping firearms out? It's always a young white male, almost always. I mean, did anyone this morning think, I wonder if that was a female? Did any of y'all think that? I mean, there's been one school shooting involving a female.
It was in Tennessee.
One. Yeah, Tennessee. But other than that, it is usually young white males.
Well, look, I don't expect anything different out of the left wing, but to have someone on Fox News, supposedly a right-winger, not only just parroting the same exact talking points, but rushing to conclusions, saying it was a young white male, or usually is, not even knowing who the shooter was, but already screaming for gun control. Do you understand how ridiculous this is, right? And then they turn around to us and they say, how dare you rush to conclusions, when conservatives are now going to actually talk about the identity of the shooter now that it's confirmed. They're going to say, you're politicizing, weaponizing this, even though the reverse already happened before you guys even knew the facts. So an update here for Trey Gowdy. I guess you could technically say that it was a young white male. I mean, that's maybe what the report will say, the autopsy or whatever. But, by the modern definitions, that's not exactly true. Yes, indeed, this individual, it turns out in the moments since, ever since the investigation has taken place, was indeed a trans individual. Apparently, this person was born as Robert Westman, and, he changed his name, apparently identified as female, and you can see some of the photographs here. Turns out as well, according to Charlie Kirk, that the suspected Minneapolis school shooter included a Defend Equality sticker in the manifesto that include a rifle over the trans flag. And he also apparently wrote on the barrel of one of the firearms that he wanted to unalive, take the life of Donald Trump. So by all accounts, right, this is a far left radical trans terrorist. That's what it is. That's a fact by now. Assuming that we don't have any wrong information, that is indeed the case. It goes on here, by the way. You can see, I guess this is the list of official documents in which this individual, Robert Westman, changed his name. So you can see, first, the legal filing says it started as Robert Westman, and they changed he was born in 2002, and then now apparently this person wants to be Robin Westman. So again, there you go. It's pretty clear by now what has happened. And so I ask, in reaction to all of this, first of all, don't be surprised, number one, if this issue just immediately goes away, right? This all gets forgotten about because the shooting does not fit the political narrative. But in the case that it does, let's break this down on two fronts. Number one is the guns, and number two are the motive, because two are clearly issues that need to be addressed in some way in America. It's just that the side screaming for gun control or blame the guns or blame the Christians and all of these things is simply wrong about that. So let's start on the gun control front, and then we'll talk about further like this shooter here. Okay, so first and foremost, as everyone screams, oh, Republicans need to pass gun control, blah, 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 this and that, I again reiterate, you have no proof, considering you don't even know what happened here truly, that any form of gun control would have prevented this shooting. But I go on here to further point out that Governor Tim Walz, no surprise, we know him, has been a big proponent of the fact that he's just implemented a bunch of new gun control in his state after implementing a ton of old gun control. In fact, you might have remembered, those of you who live in Minnesota, that earlier this year, January 1st, 2025, was the very point at which Governor Walz implemented a ton of new gun control laws, saying the following, quote, "We're not hiding behind thoughts and prayers in Minnesota." So if you want to get into this game, right, where it's like, oh, lack of gun control caused this. Okay, so Tim Walz did gun control. Why did that not stop this? Well, as it turns out, the truth is, I know we've been over this debate a million times throughout the years, but this utopian idea that you can just somehow legislate, bad people or bad ideas out of existence is ridiculous and preposterous. It's very interesting, by the way, that Trey Gowdy, of all individuals, does not understand the very obvious and basic solution to this. It's very interesting. Much like the police issue we talked about earlier in the week, the left always assumes that the issues to all these things are super complicated, right? Like, for instance, fixing crime. How do we fix crime? Oh, we need 50 pages of social science. We need to defund the police and do community policing. We need social workers, investments in education. And the right-wing solution is very simple, right? Arrest the criminals. The same is true here, by the way, when it comes to the issue of schools. Because you know what right-wingers, since Parkland and for many years now, I think even back to Sandy Hook, have been calling for, is increased school security. There should be an armed officer or a police officer on duty at, frankly, every school in this country. I believe that is to be the case. I would support legislation federally if we needed it to fund that and spend my taxpayer dollars on protecting children. Absolutely no problem. And by the way, considering that, yes, things can fall through the cracks, no amount of legislation is ever going to truly stop criminals from trying to do something if they want to do it. That is the only sure-fast way to make sure that schools are actually safe, right? But these people scream no. Okay, if that's the case, again, fine. If it happened in a red state, maybe you'd have an argument. This happened in the state of Minnesota. So what went wrong there? Serious question to Tim Walz then. Well, you can call for more gun control now? You've been in office for what, 2 terms now? How come it didn't get done? How come you were unsuccessful, right? Because, of course, the truth is, despite all of their virtue signaling and politicization about this, it's not about the guns. It's not about gun control. It's the fact that there are dangerous people in society, and we need to be protected against dangerous people in society. Of course, even earlier last year, you had Governor Tim Walz bragging about the fact that he was confiscating guns, doing red flag laws without due process. Yet somehow this one fell through the cracks, Tim Walz. How did that happen?
Whether it be red flag, extreme risk protection orders, and I think Superintendent Evans can speak to the specifics of that. I think in my latest briefing, we've issued 71 of those.
And I mean this seriously. I'm not trying to play gotcha. I'm not trying to shift blame or anything. I'm simply responding to the fact that if Minnesota Democratic politicians are going to say, we need to stop hiding behind thoughts and prayers, and Tim Walz said, we're not going to hide behind thoughts and prayers. We did something about it. Why won't the Republicans follow us? And you're going to attack us for the fact that a school shooting happened in your state. It is a genuine question to be posed. How did you not prevent this then? Yeah, isn't that interesting? Okay, secondly, as we're about to react here to the ridiculous MSNBC reaction to the information that the shooter did indeed identify as a trans, that if the Democrats are going to simultaneously turn around and say that, oh, even though this is obviously a disgusting, mentally ill, vile person who perpetrated this shooting, and there should be no excuses made for the violence, much like you heard even a couple years ago, you might hear the justification that, oh, well, that's because transphobia is inciting people to do this stuff. They just feel so persecuted and we need to be nicer to them and all this stuff.
All of us. And I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. We should not be operating out of a place of hate for anyone. We should be operating from a place of love for our kids.
Okay. Well, again, I say, this did not happen in a red state. This is not the Nashville, Tennessee situation. We saw just 2 years ago, the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, declare the state of Minnesota as a quote-unquote trans refuge. To which I once again ask, if this was driven just by transphobia, how did that happen in Minnesota then? Isn't that interesting? Check it out.
I'm gonna do it. Guess what? Love wins. Here you go.
Right, so this state has all the things that the left is demanding for and saying that, trans people are under attack or whatever because they don't have this, right? There's gender-affirming care, quote-unquote, for children, total tolerance, state system, clearly, that's encouraging of all this stuff. And yet still, these people are going to turn around and blame right-wing transphobia on this happening. Much like they're going to blame guns. Even though every aspect of this narrative goes against the very arguments that they're making. Very typical. So with that said, I want to now show you what happens the moment that MSNBC finds out that this shooter is indeed a transgender individual, which, yes, as Devory Dawkins points out here, does indeed join a long list of other similar crimes we've seen like this from radical left-wing terrorists, right? And MSNBC announces that as this person is trying to kill children, the news, while respecting his chosen pronouns and referring to him as quote-unquote they, can't even make that up. Take a listen.
We continue to follow the breaking news of the deadly shooting at a church in Minneapolis where 2 children were killed and six more children are in critical condition, along with others who were injured in this shooting. But we now have an identification on the shooter. Let me bring in MSNBC's Mark Santia along with Christopher O'Leary, a former FBI counterterrorism official. All we knew up until this point, Mark, the brief description we got at the press conference was early 20s, wearing black clothing, cargo-like pants, but now we know who this person is.
You're right, Chris. And according to multiple senior law enforcement officials briefed on this matter, they say federal law enforcement has identified the Minneapolis church shooter as Robin Westman. Now, police have said publicly that Robin Westman is in their 20s with a limited criminal history. NBC News has confirmed with those same law enforcement officials that the suspect left behind videos that were posted online. There were writings that referenced suicide, as well as extremely violent thoughts and ideas. There was an apology to their family and a handwritten sketch of the interior layout of a church. Now, Chris, it's not clear or confirmed if that sketch, that individual sketch, is the church where the shooter eventually opened fire, but that's what we know right now. So Robin Westman has been identified by federal law enforcement as the shooter.
So yeah, guys, this person is a school shooter. He killed Christian kids, etc., etc. But let's make sure that we don't misgender him. That's the priority, apparently, politically speaking, for the folks over at MSNBC. So I hope you're noticing a pattern here, because this actually is the chronicle of what happened. So first and foremost, a left-wing gender terrorist shoots and kills Christian children while they're trying to pray. And who immediately have the Democrats rush to blame? It's not left-wing terrorists. It is, first of all, Republican gun laws, even though it's a Democrat state. And then secondly, as you can see from Jacob Frey and others, actively just blaming and mocking the Christians. Apparently, it's the fault of the Christians that left-wing terrorists who come from the Democrats' political party inside of the aisle are going and committing violence against them. But that's our fault. That's our fault, guys. Disgusting people. And by the way, I'd also like to point out, little detail there. Maybe you missed it. Where they point out there was a kind of warning sign existing here. Robin here posted, videos online, things online. There's warning this was all going to happen. And yet I was told if you simply have red flag gun laws, these are the very laws that allow you to confiscate firearms and guns if someone appears to be a public safety threat. They've been heavily pushed by Democrats and even some Republicans for years, would have stopped this tragedy from happening. And yet Minnesota, as we showed you just a couple minutes ago, is ran by Tim Walz, who proudly touts the fact that he has red flag gun laws. And yet despite that, we saw this happen in Minnesota this year. Just months ago, we saw the terrorist attack against the lawmakers, the Democrat state legislators in the state, right? There's actually this repeated trend now of these targeted or mass shootings happening in his state. And I'm not trying to blame anyone, but I do ask the question as to why that could possibly be the case if red flag laws and gun control were supposedly so effective. And after anything like this happens, they say, oh, we need more. We need more. If we just take away more and more guns, even if we ban all the guns, that's going to make the guns go away. But as you can see, that's not the case. And by the way, it defies common sense. You know why? Because it doesn't matter what the law is. It doesn't matter if it says murder or theft are illegal, or guns in certain capacities are illegal. Guess what is always going to happen in a society? Things are going to slip through the cracks. You know why you need police? Because despite the fact that crimes are illegal, you need to have someone to respond to the fact that people are still going to do them. The same argument is to be made about school safety. Instead of constantly screaming about guns, the very obvious solution ought to be school security, as right-wingers have been saying. And yet David Hogg and others, in response to Parkland and many things throughout the years, they say, no, because that'll scare the kids, guys. Why should we have to have armed guards in our school? Don't you know if you just took away the guns, everything would be fine? It's ridiculous. It's naive. It doesn't even make any logical sense, right? Because even if you manage to take every single gun away, is that going to stop people who want to commit violence against kids? No. You have to actually have a deterrence. Same issue on crime, you know? So this is all to say, don't run to me and try to make your political arguments about this is your fault, Christians, because first of all, you were praying. How dare you do that? And secondly, you don't want to ban the guns. How dare you do that? No. Nothing about this, left-wingers, works in your favor. Whether it's the terrorists themselves and their motive and who he was, I should say, or the actual facts of the acquisition of the gun in this case, because not only do you not know where they are, but again, if it's Minnesota, it should have not been allowed to happen, right? Turns out gun control doesn't actually work. But you know what? I've made my case today. So that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.